As a newish player working up my confidence to attempt an Inferno Cape, I am a huge advocate for content that helps you learn mechanics while offering decent rewards. The Phantom Muspah embodies this concept in a unique way that has not been seen in old school RuneScape before. On the day of release, I managed to get 35k C, and I learned a ton about 3 mechanics that I thought I had a pretty good handle on. There are no mid-tier bosses in old school RuneScape that offer an introduction to pathing, prayer flicking, and gear switching the way the Phantom Muspah does. Now before you start yelling about the acid phase of Vorkath, Jad phase of Zulrah, and other fights like the demonic gorillas, let me explain. Starting with prayer flick. Now I am a player that can switch between prayers pretty quickly and even consistently one-tick prayer flick to not lose prayer points. I can handle Jad and Jad Zulrah phase no problem, but I had no experience alternating between an attack and defense prayer until the shield phase of the Phantom boss. I lazy flick Piety during Slayer and some other boss fights, but in the Phantom boss it is much more important to be precise with your flicks during his shield phase. Now this is interesting because you have to time your attack cycle so that it offsets with the boss's attack, meaning you have to consider the speed of the weapon you're using, you need to consider the visual and sound cues of both the boss and your own character. After switching to a crossbow for this phase, I still take my time, making sure to start my own attack cycle that has a decent gap between the Phantom cycle. I think this is the coolest part of this fight because it is almost necessary to at least attempt smiting. However, I did manage to do my first 2 kills without using smite. They just took forever and I took a lot of damage. I'm a huge fan of this phase, but now I want to talk about the pathing mechanics that lead up to this phase. So there are a couple different strategies that you can use to take on the melee phase of the Phantom Muspah. The 2 main strategies being kiting or freezing. I opted to use the kiting strategy on day 1 because this is something I have tried a couple times in the God Wars dungeons, but I still haven't become very good at it. Now after just 35k C at the Phantom, I was already feeling better at kiting and pathing. I started off kiting by going around the room following the square walls, but I realized that running around in a hexagon will get you hit by his melee phase a lot less. Kiting at the Phantom boss also makes you intentional with your clicks because of the spikes that spawn randomly around the room. For example, if a wall of spikes is blocking your path, you need to make sure you skip over the wall by clicking in front of it until you are registered on that tile. The true tile indicator on Rune Light is super helpful for learning the pathing mechanic. Highly recommend. Additionally, because there is not a lot of pressure to be perfect when kiting this boss, it has allowed me to pay attention to continuously attacking while running without losing ticks. I've started to pay attention to how many times I see my tile indicator move. Each time it moves is 1 tick, and with a 4-tick weapon, that means I should be clicking the boss after I see it move 3 times. And that right there is why I think this is an excellent piece of content. Low pressure. This boss fight excels at making you try these new mechanics while not punishing you too harshly for making mistakes. Bringing us to the 3rd mechanic, which is gear switching. This is the first boss I have ever attempted to do an 8-way switch. The defensive stats for the different phases of this boss have yet to be released, and it doesn't show you when you try to use the Monster Examine lunar spell. From my experience, it seems to have pretty high magic defense even in melee form, so I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to try an 8-way switch to get that extra magic accuracy bonus. In the melee phase, it is relatively easy to avoid taking melee hits, so you don't need any kind of defense bonuses. Additionally, you don't need to be perfect with your gear switches because you can keep your distance from the boss and slowly click on your gear piece by piece if you need to. I'm pretty comfortable with 4 to 6-way switches, and so a couple times I even did my switches 4 at a time while keeping my distance and taking no damage while I was switching. What makes this boss fight so amazing for learning is that it doesn't crucify players for making mistakes with any of these 3 mechanics, but it is also very rewarding for players that don't make these mistakes. Meaning you take damage for making mistakes, but they won't necessarily get you killed as long as you camp a higher HP throughout the fight. You'll start to get kills consistently after making fewer and fewer mistakes. As you optimize, you will start to get multi-kill trips. I currently get 2 kill trips with this setup and 3 to 4 kills if I get a supply drop from the boss. This boss has very minimal unavoidable damage, which is a huge plus over Zulrah's blue phase. And so it feels very rewarding to learn this boss. I personally do not see many uses for the bow that it drops, but the essence should stay at a pretty reliable price because I do plan on farming this boss until I can upgrade my imbued heart, meaning other players will be looking to buy the essence to do the same. I have a sneaking suspicion that the future content introduced to the game will provide more uses for this bow, which could help sustain its value in the future. While this content is still new, my first impressions are that it is a good learning tool for players like myself trying to get better at the game without doing content that requires me to constantly hit my face against a wall. Big fan. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you consider subscribing. I'm a new creator trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I have been enjoying making a variety of content that may just suit your fancy. I hope you're having a great day. Peace!